Great. Well, thank you very much to everyone for coming. And let me just mention that I'm dialing in from Montreal, which is unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory, part of the Mohawk Nation. Let me tell you about our extraordinary guest today. You may know John for his role in recent years as the biggest driving force behind the World Happiness Report, and also as a tireless advocate for bringing positive thinking and evidence on happiness to the policy spheres and practice. All the while, he continues to publish new research insights on happiness. You should know as well, though, that before these roles, he has a record of an illustrious career with extensive public and professional service and with an extraordinarily long list of accomplishments. I think it's from the beginning been characterized both by John being an empiricist and by John being very interested in policy. Just to give you a tiny snippet, John's a former president of the Canadian Economics Association. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. He's an officer of the Order of Canada and is the recipient of several honorary doctorates. I was lucky enough to meet John as a PhD student many years ago at UBC when he was already an emeritus prof, and where he was the first person to whom I could really open up fully about my discomforts with the standard approaches in economics, which has led to study of happiness being a big part of my life. John, thank you so much for making time and for being here after a quick recovery. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Chris. And let me say that to have you as a colleague for all those years has been extraordinarily important and a real advantage to the profession and to me personally. I seem to be losing my voice here. That wasn't supposed to be part of the procedure. Well, for those of you who weren't totally eclipsed by the eclipse, the World Happiness Report came out on March the 20th, and it was a different version in a way now. We now had 3 launch events, 2 in person and 1 online, and in person one at Gallup headquarters in Washington, D.C., another one in Queen Elizabeth Hall in London, and a 3rd online one in the Asia Pacific region. I think our plan now is in future to do this, to have events. So we've got one in each of the 1/3 of the globe. So everybody ought to be able to see something live in a reasonable time zone. The focus of this year's report was to look at happiness by age and generation, which we did in a chapter in 2015, but we haven't come back since. And as I'll show you, and you may already have seen, lots has changed since 2015. In 2015 report, the age and gender information we were using was from the first few years of the survey, the Gallup World Poll. And now we have enough, so we spent most of our time now talking about differences between 26 to 2010, which was the base period in the Gallup World Poll, to 21-23, which is the current ranking period. Let me get right into it, because I really want to get your suggestions for explaining what we found. This is very much and always has been an empirical report. We like to dig into and maybe even create some of the science in the process. But basically, we're assembling these facts from the Gallup World Poll and getting them out there in a form that others can use and consider. So this is the first by age group. We looked at ages below 30, 30 to, and then divided the middle group into 2. And then the 60 plus, most of our comparisons are the under 30s compared to the 60 plus. You can see it's a different picture across the world. This is one of the relatively few places where we split by gender, because we can't split everything at once. And you can see here that the gender differences are biggest in the Middle East and North Africa, and at the high ages in Latin America and the Caribbean. The one region that's going to be a special focus to it, part because we're in it, and part because it did the most unusual things, is the 4-country group called North America and ANZ. So it's really US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, somewhat, so basically the gender differences are never very big, and they differ by age only in some smaller places. Now here we're changing and we're looking at the whole population, but we're comparing 26 to 10 to, in the orange, 2021 to 2023. You can see that in some countries, the young are the happiest. That's most, we saw that before too, but now we're looking at changes. And you can see the changes in happiness are in different directions in different parts of the world. In Central and Eastern Europe, there's a big increase in the last 15 years. In North America and the other countries in that group, there's been a significant drop, a significant increase in East Asia, and a significant decline in South Asia. So things are going differently in different parts of the world. And you can see it's also true by age group. So especially in North America, the drop is biggest. It's significant everywhere, but it's biggest in the under 30s, where it's essentially, as you can see, a full point averaged over those 4 countries. Another thing to note here, because we make quite a lot of it in the report, is that there's been a continuing convergence between Central and Eastern Europe and Western Europe. You can see that by how much the orange line for Central and Eastern Europe is above the blue line. So they've been busy catching up to Western Europe. And you can see for those under 30, that orange line is essentially the same in Central and Eastern Europe as it is in Western Europe. So this convergence is now complete for the young, but you can see it's still got a long way to go for the old. And there's a mixture of reasons for that in different parts of Eastern Europe. Let me just carry on here. So now we're looking at negative emotions, which have increased everywhere. This is the gender difference. This is, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth between gender differences in levels and changes through time. This one is going back to the gender differences in emotions now. We're not talking changes. Changes will be the next slide. So this is not new. This has always been the case that negative emotions are more frequently reported by females than males, while life evaluations typically go the other way around with a smaller difference. And you can see that the male-female difference in North America is biggest among the male-female difference is biggest among the under 30s, and that's not true elsewhere. So something special is going on in North America, is what we're seeing. Oh, wait a minute. We looked at negative emotion changes, happiness changes, negative emotions by age. Okay, so these are the changes, and we've been through that. And now here's the positive affect. This is an interesting finding. There's not been so much changes in positive affect from the first part of the Gallup poll to now in any part of the world, although you can see much more positive affect in Central and Eastern Europe than much more now than in 26 to 2010. And that matches the life evaluations. Typically, we find when we do our modeling that the pass-through from positive emotions to life evaluations is much stronger than that for negative emotions. And so we typically find them going in the same direction. So positive emotions up in those countries that have been increasing in life evaluations, and down in the ones that have been going in the other direction, like South Asia and North America. And you see the drop in positive emotions is biggest among the old, but everywhere, and this is the thing that you notice, the U shape in age for life evaluations is not matched for positive emotions. So positive emotions tend to be generally highest in the younger age groups and lower at the higher age groups. And that's a phenomenon that is everywhere in the world, although the slope is somewhat different. Now, I'm turning to inequality of happiness here. And what do you see? You see everywhere inequality of happiness greater than it was before. It tends everywhere other than North America and Australia and New Zealand to be slightly higher at the higher age groups than at the lower age groups, although that's not universal. And you find that the inequality has grown more among the young than the old, but it's much smaller in North America and Western Europe than elsewhere, and in Central and Eastern Europe. And Sub-Saharan Africa is where the inequality has grown most. So the average across the world is almost 20%. Well, two things are combined. I've pointed out to you already the convergence between Eastern and Western Europe. And so that's meant that some of the Eastern and Central European countries have got themselves up into the top 20, and that's pushed United States and Germany significantly down. They were 15 and 16 last year, and they're 23 and 24 this year. As you might imagine, that's created a huge amount of attention in the United States, not just the origins of it. Lines up with the recent publication of Jonathan Haidt's book, but there's lots of other people who've been looking at these same phenomena. I really appreciate some feedback from you on that. And then we did also, picking up on our age-related theme, we said, why should we just rank by the whole population? Let's do it separately for the old and the young and the middle groups too. But in the main report, we actually did the rankings for the old and the young. The most striking differences between the old rankings and the young rankings were for Canada and the United States, where I think Canada, the two ranks were 50 apart, and the United States 52 apart. So to give you an example, Canada ranked number 8 for the happiness of those 60 plus, and 58 for those under 30, while the United States ranked 10th for those 60 plus, but 62nd for those. And that's an extraordinary difference that's not matched anywhere else. And it's not a global phenomenon. People are used to thinking of the technology then putting these pressures on young people all over the world, but it is definitely not a global phenomenon. There are many, many countries where the rankings for the young are better than the rankings for the old. And in particular, of course, you already see this, that Central and Eastern Europe, where in some sense, and we look at specific examples in the Balkans and also in the some of the other fall of the wall Eastern Bloc countries, where the old have not risen out of their previous levels of unhappiness, while the young generation have, so that they are in fact as satisfied with their lives as those in Western European countries. So you could see that they'll rank much higher in life evaluations for the young in those countries. And also we look at overall changes in happiness, and we rank, we note that there is much as up close to 2 points in some countries, and down essentially much, or about sort of 15 countries with increases of more than a point, and about the same number with decreases of more than a point. They all have their own particular histories. And this is just one way of looking at the rankings. These are for people under 30. Israel has always been one of those countries where the young are happier than the old. The one we've already talked about, Lithuania, and Serbia we haven't talked about so much. But again, you can see this is both bad news and good news. Those in the countries that were torn apart and were tearing each other's lives apart, literally, in the 1990s in the former Yugoslavia, the people who were adults at that time are still pretty unhappy, while they have managed to recreate these societies for the young, so that the young, in fact, are forward-looking. So although there is a after damage for those that were most closely connected, it's kind of reassuring that in fact a new generation can slough off is the wrong word, but to restart the society. And that's showing up in a different realm in Lithuania and Latvia and others. You see, of course, some of the traditionally high countries like Denmark and Iceland and Finland are also happy for those under 30, but they're even happier typically for the older. They're just happy for everybody. Now, what we did this year and had not done before is exploit the fact that there are now enough countries in the Gallup World Poll and enough years that we can do an attempt to separate age and generation effects. So in one of the appendix tables, we do our modeling at the micro level, then separating age and generation. And you can see the three broad generation groups we've used. And we find that there are indeed both generational effects and age effects, so that roughly we estimate that about a quarter of a point higher for the boomers than for the millennials and post-millennials. And within these generations, within the younger generation, the drop per year is about 0.03 per year of age, and 0.006 plus for those at the other end. We spent quite a lot of time in the chapter talking about how it could be the case that people who are year by year having worse health, year by year they're having, generally speaking, fewer actual social connections. And we have data that we report on this. The reported interaction with everybody but neighbors is less for those over 60 than those under 30. Their health is worse and their health matters more to them. But yet they're happier. And so we go into some of that literature, and Carstensen was the leader of that literature about the turn of the century, arguing that as people pass through their lives, they eventually reach a stage where they rethink their objectives and they rethink the way that they see things, and they pay more attention to the positives and less to the negatives. And there are lots of experimental context when you can see that, showing people's images and seeing how they respond. There is overall, as you well know, a well-established negativity bias where people pay more attention to the negative, they remember it more, they respond to it more. And that gives them, of course, amplified by the media, it gives them a false view, an overly pessimistic view of the nature of the world around them. Well, this age-related positivity effect is coming in about middle age typically and offsetting that. Some people have worried that by offsetting them too much, it would then make elderly people overly subject to scams. So fortunately, there's some new experiments that we report that were done where they actually exposed to online scams an older sample and a younger sample. They found within the samples, as you might expect, that those who had fewer cognitive capacities and less tech savviness were more likely to be scammed. They found, nonetheless, that even given their lower tech savviness and on average less mental acuity, the elder group was less likely to be scammed than the younger group. So that's saying that by and large, this positivity effect is indeed causing people to make better views of their experience, to have a more positive view of life, and to value and choose their connections both wisely and well. So they're shutting the bad memory drawer, keeping the other one open. And the beauty of these scamming experiments is to say, no, this doesn't mean they're just going to walk out in the street and be run over by a bus. They're not only able to offset the negativity bias to a substantial degree, but they do it in a way that shows enough wisdom that they're going to actually gain in life evaluations as a consequence. Now, another twist that came out of this with a special Canadian one is that I don't know whether any of you saw the article on Happy Quebec in La Presse, but they phoned and said, what's going on in Quebec? Is this, what can you tell us? This was before the report came out. Can you tell us what's special about Quebec? But it was after the report was written, so we couldn't use these results in the report. So we split out Quebec from the rest of Canada, and that drop in the rest of Canada in the youth happiness of about 1.2 points was only half as great in Quebec. And that's a really striking difference. And my guess is if we were able to, if we'd gone back and did it between Francophone responders, Anglophone responders, the gap probably would have been even more. I'll be very interested to see the extent to which you think this plays in to the notion that there's a particular amplification of the negativity bias that's going on, fueled by oppositional political cultures, oppositional cultures in schools, in universities, workplaces, where people are ranging themselves in competing groups and in fact ending up being less happy as a consequence. And it's quite possible that this kind of amplification of negativity is going on more in the English language parts of the culture than elsewhere in the world. It's got a geographic focus too, because it's present but smaller in Australia and New Zealand. It's much less in the United Kingdom. In fact, it's more evident in Germany than in the United Kingdom. So I'd like to hear more from you on that. Let me just finish and open for discussion by going into something quite else. That, as you remember, we quite remarkably found that life evaluations weren't changed during COVID on average across the world. And so people said, oh, nothing changes life evaluations. Well, you should have seen what happened to life evaluations in Israel. And after October 7th, they went down like a stone, and they were highest reporting negative emotions anywhere in the world, life evaluation. Anyway, as you saw from our previous results, are lots of times life evaluations can't change. Well, they didn't change during COVID. So what's going on? And so we've been analyzing these things for the last few years. And among the things that have been supports are, in fact, that as we've already studied in previous reports, natural disasters, while doing terrible damage, can in fact create greater trust and even higher life evaluations, because they help to reverse the false negativity bias. If, for example, there's an earthquake and all your neighbors rush out to help each other and you didn't think they would, then you end up feeling better about them and yourselves than you did before. So you said, my goodness, this, and there's, after Fukushima, of course, there was quite a lot of evidence of this in Japan, and there's after the earlier great earthquakes and so on. So there were a lot of evidence for natural disasters, and COVID in its way was just that. And so here we're finding that in this picture, we're looking at the percent of the population who performed each of these benevolent acts in each of the generational groups before COVID, 3 years before COVID, and then the 4 years post-COVID. And you can see those whisker plots there are the 95% region. So these are large, statistically very significant, empirically very large increases. And that makes people feel better. That's part of the story, that there's no question that people like. And so people were surprised by this. And I'll now give you a couple of slides to show that too. Oh, by the way, the generational twist, it was a natural to go and say, because it's a big deal in the United States, this talk about the millennials and post-millennials. Are they the we generation, the me generation, or just another generation? And part of the negativity bias is people tend to think everything's getting worse. And so there's a lot of talk about the millennials being selfish and the me generation. Well, you can see here that that ain't the case, both before COVID and in response to COVID, which is a better experimental context because everyone's getting COVID at the same time. So you can compare the generations in real time. That the millennials, in fact, responded even more than the boomers and Generation X in terms of increasing benevolence in these times when it was needed. So this is helping to offset some of the negativity with which these other evidence about declining youth life evaluations is being seen. Is to say, wait a minute, these people have not lost either their capacity or their willingness to help others when they're probably being fed a diet of an excess negativity, and they're feeling badly about it all in a variety of dimensions, but it hasn't turned off their capacities or their interest in doing things for others. And this is picking up from an old report who said that benevolence, it isn't just a twist of fate, it's extraordinarily important. So if you're getting a big increase in benevolence, you're going to get a big increase in happiness. And there was this big increase in benevolence. And this is showing how a wallet return, this is from an earlier survey where negative effects were being asked about within the same probability scale as a wallet return. So you could actually make comparable things. And you can see that to feel you're in a society where people watch your back and not just are honest, but they're pro-social, they're going to come out and help you, which wallet return is quite explicit about. Is extraordinarily important for people, and you can see why it would be. So here we get to the experimental wallet evidence. We previously had evidence in Canada. Those wallets dropped by the Toronto Star, where 80% of them were returned, and the General Social Survey in Canada says the expected rate of return, if found by a stranger, was only 25%. So that was the first line. And people said, well, maybe that's just one off and it won't work. the science article that many of you will know actually did not quite a wallet dropping, but it was very similar, asking someone to deliver a wallet back to its owner. Then we had the wallet questions put in kindly by the Lloyd's Register Foundation into a special round of the Gallup, an ordinary round of the Gallup World Poll. And so for these 40 countries, we had actual experimental evidence and the expected return. And this is the graphing of that. Well, there are two things you can see from this. One is that, as a sense, it's implied by what I've already been alleging to you, that the negativity bias is alive and living, alive and well, and causing people to be too pessimistic about the goodwill and behavior of those around them. So they really don't think their wallets would be returned, but they are. It's almost a 2-to-1 margin of actual return over expected return. That experiment is not precise. However, Reader's Digest not only did its mid-1990s experiment, they repeated it in 2018, and they found where they were actually dropping money-bearing wallets in the way that underlay the structure of our question. Once again, it's about a 2-to-1 gap between the two. Now, you say, does benevolence make you happy? Well, look at the countries at the top. We put in the labels of the countries that are the actual high countries on the wallet return. Denmark, Norway, and Switzerland have all been number one in the world rankings. Finland isn't up there, but that's just because they weren't in the science experiment. In the most recent Reader's Digest experiment in 2018, Finland, in fact, was the highest wallet returning country. So it helps you to see what's going on in those countries, because these are things that have nothing directly to do with ordinary social safety nets and so on. It isn't a political thing that's going on here. Wallets are returned by your friends and neighbors, and of course you want a public service that does the same for you. I have I think used more than my share of the time, and I'd like to turn it over quickly and belatedly to your questions. Thank you.
I would like to unmute myself. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, John. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself there. Thank you, as always, for your combination of data analysis and storytelling. This is all very compelling. So, as usual, you can raise your hand with Zoom or write in the chat, or if it's quiet, even just jump in. I was going to start us off, but I won't. Said, do you want to unmute? Yes.
Oh yeah, well, you can also start if you want. I'm jumping in the car in a moment, so I raised my hand to do it. Okay, well, thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, and thank you for the newest report. Very interesting. I jotted down a few thoughts, both of Finland and some of the findings, and I'll just share these insights, and would be very interested to hear your reflections. So first, about comparing the young and old in Western Europe and North America, I was thinking that in a country, the young compared to the old. So in Eastern Europe, the old are still living in, well, not primitive conditions, but differently than in North America. So like when the young in Eastern Europe compare for the old or to the old, they feel that, well, their life, or like they have such different opportunities. Whereas in North America, when you compare to the older generation, like they have succeeded in many ways, and life in North America seems hard. Like it's expensive, it's uncertain, and it seems like there are not as much easy opportunities as there used to be. So like that is at least something I thought about. Also, well, moving to North America has sparked a lot of thoughts. So, well, there was this book just that came out on like the anxious generation, and like I can see quite a few of the reasons. And one thing that I couldn't first put words on when we moved, that came in like children's books and like in many rhetorics, was this thought that you can do anything. And when we tell this to the young generation, and then the realities hit, that can be hard. And like I would want to rephrase it, not you can do anything, but you can do many things. So like it's not because of you that anything isn't possible, but there are things you can do. So that was one thing. Then I was thinking already earlier when I read the report about the like Finland having the younger that are not as happy. That is the phase when Finnish young people move to their own house, build their life, study, and kind of build up their life. So it's kind of a hard time to build up your life. But then you build for the future, which I thought that was kind of a nice thing. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there. Well, I can just say it was a little bit sad that when the report came out, Finland was at the top. A few weeks after, we had a very tragical happening in Finland among well, it was a school shooting. It was a bullying situation, and yeah, a true tragedy. But one thing I noticed there was how people talked about it in a way that how did we get here? What should we do? So there was still the common concern for our country. But like being the happiest and then having this incident was kind of shocking at the time. But yeah, sorry for taking such a long time in my thoughts and reflections, but yeah, wanted to share these.
Thank you so much. And I like you, when I saw that awful event, I said, no one is, in a way, that's saying some of these communicated pressures do get all over the world, and not just in English language places and environments. They can hit even those societies that are best protected against that. But as you say, the Finns, even when these awful things happen, we've had similar things, of course, in Norway and Sweden. The way they're handled is quite different. The first point you made, is I think extraordinarily important, that we don't do people a favor by putting them in a position where they are expected to be able to do anything and everything, because that's not humanly possible. And especially if it's combined with success measures that in fact are relative rather than absolute, then you're going to get people in a winner-take-all situation where that tends to leave a lot of people feeling they haven't performed and unhappy. And I suspect that kind of set of offering objectives may well have had a linguistic component to it and be affecting everybody, maybe, but much more so in North America. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ken?
John, it's a wonderful presentation, and it's always a pleasure not only hearing what you have to say, but also observing your face, beaming and full of goodness and love for everything you do and say. And it's a real pleasure for me to have this experience face to face, to hear you speak. One of the observations that I made from the presentation is how happiness has risen in Eastern Europe, in the former Commonwealth countries, though not as much as Eastern Europe, but still there's a significant increase in the level of happiness. East Asia, though not South Asia. And would this be linked, what this suggests is that there's a link between improving economy as opposed to, the rate of improvement in living standards and opportunities, because Eastern Europe, the former Commonwealth, the Commonwealth independent countries, East Asia, there's been more freedom the last 30 years, and that is reflected mostly among the young. So that gives them more hope about the future. So living in an environment which is creating more opportunity and creating more hope for the young generation, there's been a difference. Whereas in North America, we've already been at kind of peak levels for more than a generation now. So there's not as much room for improvement, and especially when it comes to the younger generation that are the kind of the new arrival generation in society. Could that have anything? I mean, how would you comment on that?
Well, the new arrival thing is not what we typically have found. We typically have found people start out full of hope and positive feelings at the start of their life, and then they discover life is difficult in midlife for a variety of reasons, and then get this age-related positivity effect coming in later on. I agree with what you're suggesting about what's happened in the countries on the other side of the old Berlin Wall, that life was very different than when I was going back to the wallet experiments. I went back to the original Reader's Digest experiment, and they actually ran the mid-1990s experiment in East Germany and West Germany. And they find the wallet return was 70% in West Germany and 20% in East Germany. And that difference in shared mutual trust, I've already tried to argue how important that is for how you feel about your society and yourselves. That kind of looking after each other is quite separate from, but related to, this sense of freedom. It isn't just me getting ahead, it's us together creating something. So the old shackles have been removed. And as we know, that didn't automatically bring in socially engaging and productive institutions in all those countries. But where it has, then it gives hope of a sort that will, and I haven't gone back to see whether there's any wallet dropping experiments now in the two parts of Germany, but the way that I've told the story, you should expect to find the wallet return now being higher in the eastern part than it was, and converging to that it was in the western part. So these interpersonal relationships are, if a society is developing well, you take off the shackles, and then they will allow people to work not just in their own interests, but for others. And that's very important. It's that I think, now this is pure speculation at this stage because we only now started focusing on it. My guess is that young people now in these two countries you mentioned, who've got everything in a sense, and the societies have the basic institutions in hand, but they're now they're feeling guilty or angry about the environment, about social relations, post-colonial relations, you name it. Any number of things are friction points, and they're feeling some combination of guilt and anger about that. Well, that's what you call the truth part. The reconciliation part is to say, well, we're all here together. Let's work to make things better. And it's when you've turned that page and you actually say, no, this is not me versus you, this is us trying to build a better future. We have all the capacities, all we need is the will. You have to then somehow convince them that they've got a false impression about the situation around them. And if people are really much better and more cooperative than they think they are, and then you have to then create what are called broader social identities, where there isn't these more and more divided small groups. It's a bigger group that can work together to solve these problems. I think that change can be made, just as this change among the young happened in 10 years. Well, nothing fundamental's happened in 10 years. That's all perceptions about what's going on. So it happened in 10 years. It could be reversed in 10 years. But it really does require a change in the mode of thought and the way in which the social and other media are used, et cetera, but not by police action. That's not the point. It's by individual self-actualization. Anyway, I'm speaking beyond the data here, but in a sense, that's what we have to do, and then look for the data that support or not.
Thank you.
John, can I ask a little detail that relates to your very first slide? We're used to expecting U-shapes in these age profiles, and in this chapter, you have broader age categories which substantially hide that pattern. Is that mostly what's going on? Is if you had higher resolution in age, would we see most of places a U-shape?
No, because if you look at a considerable number of them, they're quite obviously lowest at one end or the other. So you're not going to get a U out of that by converting those 15-year things into 5-year bags or 1-year bags. There's been a real shift. And it never was a very big. We could do the 5-year thing instead of the 15-year bundles. We split the middle group into 2 just to avoid that problem, to make sure the usual 50 was a center point in one of the groups, and it didn't make any real difference. There's actually more U-shaped countries now than 12 years ago by our definition of U-shape, mainly through appearing in Africa. But even the people who were the hardline proponents of the U-shape said it's always and everywhere. They're now saying, well, it isn't always and everywhere. But in our analysis that I presented, when we look at generation effects and age effects within these generations, it's down in the young and up in the old. So there is a U shape on the back end and at the front end directionally. It's not big enough to overpower everything else, always.
Mathieu, do you want to read your question out, please? Or ask me to? Okay. Okay, so Mathieu is asking, thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to the lecture. And I analyze happiness policies, including those of the UAE. As part of the UAE Vision 2021 strategy, they wanted to be among the 5 happiest countries in the world, according to the World Happiness Report. A few years ago, quantitative research did not include immigrants due to language exclusion. Thus, the results in this country, where 85% of the population are expats, could be far from the happiness of the state and closer to the happiness of the nation. Has anything changed in this regard, and how should we perceive the results of this country and others where human rights are violated?
There was a year where we looked at the happiness of immigrants separately from the happiness of the domestically born, and we found that it was almost a complete match. So the happiest immigrants in the world were the immigrants in Finland, and in the UAE, they had huge numbers of foreign workers who had lower subjective well-being than the Emirati-born, but significantly higher than their matched counterparts in the countries they came from. And so the UAE was more or less on the same scale with the other countries. There's a fair amount of evidence that people really are happier where their own rights and opportunities are looked after. As your note, initially in the UAE, the languages were not offered for the major groups. That is now done, and it changed things slightly, but not dramatically.
I'm going to keep monopolizing here. Or is this? Oh, thank you. John, everyone has been asking you since the... Oh, Sofia, please go ahead, because there's not much time left. I've already asked questions.
I have a feeling we have the same one, and I don't know, John, if you'll be able to answer this one. Also, thank you so much for the presentation. Can you tell us what's next? I know that there's typically a theme for every World Happiness Report. Would you be able to tell us what you'll be exploring next year? And if you can't tell us that, what's the most interesting follow-up studies that you could see that would be looking at the relationship between age and subjective well-being?
Well, we're in active discussions on all those things, as you might guess. One notion we're playing around with is just thinking about caring and sharing as fundamental characteristics of the way in which people connect. And of course, you could imagine caring and sharing being exclusionary and small, or in larger ambits. We are also planning to publicly ask people to suggest both themes and specific topics that they think are worth, because we make our networks as broad and inclusive as we can, but I think we owe people a chance to throw ideas in so we're not making any final decisions until we explicitly ask for advice from other people. So feel free to let us know what's important. We're not going to go dig back right away and immediately into this age issue as the whole theme, except undoubtedly it's going to demand some explanation in some of the other things we look at. It's quite striking.
Thanks. So let's, seeing the time, let's bring this to a close so we don't go over. John, thank you so much for spending time with us. This is a cherished conversation. And let me then just announce that we have one more talk in the series this term. That is on May the 6th, and it's Shigeo Ishii. And we have a title which is Culture and Wellbeing, maybe, of course, if you know Shige, Conceptual and Measurement Issues. Thank you very much to everybody for coming, and look forward to seeing you in just over 3 weeks. No, probably 3 weeks.
Thanks so much. A pleasure to be with you all.
Thanks, John. Take care.